Welcome to our presentation. Today we're discussing the paper Collective Action Dynamics under External Rewards, Experimental Insights from Andean Farming Communities by Narloch, Pascual and Drucker from 2012. Our presentation is split up into 4 parts. First we deliver a summary of the paper, then we go into the highlights. Then Selim will start to compare the present paper with the one we presented 4 weeks ago. And then we will address the question how both papers help better design payments for ecosystem services. To start off, we already want to dive into the main aspect of the paper, which was to find out about the effects of payments for ecosystem services, which are also called PES, on the provision of a public good and the interactions with social norms. The paper is divided into 6 sections. First, there is an introduction into the topic. The second section is a brief overview about former studies about the interaction of formal and informal institutions. Section 3 provides information about the field context where the experiment is conducted before the design and the setting of the game is described in Section 4. Section 5 is about the results of the different reward systems, and Section 6 concludes the topic. Previous studies have already examined different aspects of payments for ecosystem services. PES have been said to be a more flexible and effective way to protect public ecosystem services than regulations are. In rural communities, it has been found that people found a way to manage ecosystem services, and in many areas, these collective actions are based on social norms. In such context, it has been found that PES could provide only little additional financial incentives, but they could affect moral incentives for conservation. It also has been discussed that PES could crowd out certain pro-social norms. Other evidence shows that PES in form of individual payments can on the one hand crowd out, that means erode such social norms, but on the other hand complement them, that means crowd them in. To find out about the effect and interactions of PES and social norms, an impure public goods game was conducted in the Andean Altiplano in Bolivia and Peru. The task for the farmers was to choose between different crop varieties to grow on their lands. It was designed in a way that traditional crops, while bringing lower market returns than commercial varieties, also generate public goods benefits for the public, such as, for example, disease regulation. It is important to know that both crowding out and crowding in effects may occur when financial payments are made. For example, knowing that others are paid for their efforts, one could be relieved of guilt of non-cooperative behavior, which would be a crowding out, so a negative effect. On the other hand, one could feel ashamed or guilty when only acting due to self-interest, which would be a crowding in effect, so a positive effect. Sorry. The experiment was designed as follows. There were groups of 4 players, and each player received a number of fixed land units. In one setting, each player received 4 land units, and in another setting, 2 players received 2 units and 2 players received 6 units. Over 12 rounds, players choose how many units of a threatened variety T they want to allocate to conservation. Private returns of threatened variety T are lower than those of commercial varieties. Players receive a benefit from keeping their units, as well as from the conservation of the threatened variety, as soon as the total number of conserved units in a group reaches a certain threshold. 6 rounds of a baseline game without rewards are played, and further 6 rounds where players either receive collective or individual rewards. Before turning to the highlights of the paper and going into detail about the results, we can say in advance that individual payments have a positive effect on the conservation of the public good, and collective payments have no or even a negative effect. Then we will come to the highlights of the paper. As I already mentioned, the present study is about an impure public good game in Bolivia and Peru. And the main question behind the study was to find out whether collective or individual payments influence the conservation of land. There are 2 channels how external rewards can affect the conservation of land. First, by providing additional financial incentives, and second, by interacting with social preferences. One can see that there's a certain amount of pro-social behavior. In the first round of the game, approximately 40% of land is conserved. That shows that farmers are unconditionally cooperative. They conserve land even though they don't know about the conservation of other farmers. This is most likely because of a combination of altruism and positive expectations due to trust in others. The main results are the following. Crop-dependent farmers, which is reflected by lower livestock and larger land holdings, tend to conserve more. Disadvantaged farmers in Peru conserve less land. This implies that less wealthy farmers do not carry a higher share of the burden of conservation. There is evidence of free-riding behavior in Bolivia, and this shows that commercialization in Bolivia goes hand in hand with a loss in agrobiodiversity and an erosion of social norms. This contradicts the general opinion that communities that are integrated in markets tend to solve cooperation problems better. An explanation for that is that the more already strongly market-integrated communities get commercialized, the more competitive behavior is stimulated, which again is undermining pro-social norms. Then, collective rewards have no impact either in the Peruvian nor in the Bolivian side. Through a set of pro-social dynamics, including the strengthening of altruism, individual rewards seem to create a stabilizing effect on the conservation of land in Bolivia. In Peru, the effects of individual payments are positive too, but not as easy to explain. To sum up, we can say that collective rewards on the one hand lead to a crowding out effect and an undermining of social norms. And on the other hand, individual rewards lead to a crowding in effect and increased conservation levels. Lastly, there is to say that further research could concentrate on assessing existing social norms that are of relevance in connection with payments for ecosystem services and the reasons behind crowding in and crowding out effects. Now Selim will proceed and compare the 2 papers and figure out how they better help design payment for ecosystem services.
Already said, I will now compare the papers, how they were built, what the findings were, and so on. First, we will look at the paper from Blanco and others. The paper from Blanco and others investigates the economic relevance of ecosystem services, their contribution, and compare them to the global GDP, which is the 2 times in 2011. They also find a large-scale degradation which threatens the continued provision of economic services. The policies for the degradation were payments for the ecosystem services. The users from these services should account for the environmental costs. The motivation behind this is that the PES institutions support the provision of ecosystem services by insiders. So they can either go voluntary or not. But what is a PES institution? It is usually a governmental institution, and if not, they are mostly NGOs. The objective of the study from Blanco and others is to find out the external benefits from public goods, the institutional arrangement, subjects who can provide a public good, and subjects who benefit from a public good but cannot provide it. The study focuses on a transfer account institution. This institution enables the outsiders to support insiders. Conditional and unconditional transfers. There are also behavioral questions coming up. For example, to what extent outsiders will use the opportunity to subsidize the contributions of insiders, and how insiders will respond to these subsidies. The paper from Naloch and others, on the other hand, is first divided into 6 sections. They address the effects of individual and collective rewards and find through the references in the paper that PES systems are more flexible and effective than regulations from, for example, governments. Rural communities found in the paper have found ways to manage ecosystem services, and these are mostly based on social norms, which the paper also investigates. The payments for ecosystem services offer, therefore, a limited additional financial incentive, but cannot affect moral incentives. The paper also finds out a crowding out effect, which comes from social preferences and norms. And looking at how the study was built, it was a field study, and the experiment was conducted as an impure public goods game in the Andean region in Bolivia and Peru, compared to the paper from Blanco and others, which was a laboratory experiment. In Bolivia and Peru, the players were farmers who could choose between different crops. Traditional crops would often generate lower returns in public good benefits, but they found out that there is a crowding out and a crowding in effect possible. A crowding out effect, just as an example, would be a guilt relief or feeling ashamed when acting due to self-interest, which would be crowding in. Now we will focus on how these 2 papers and their studies could lead to a better design of PES systems. And to find that out, we need to have a look at what exactly the papers did and what they found out. The paper from Blanco and others, for example, based its study on previous literature in this matter that both conditional and unconditional transfers are important in this topic. The authors could explore a social dilemma that insiders make voluntary contributions to a public good. The outsiders, also in the study, have therefore the possibility to subsidize contributions from insiders by making transfers. Similar former studies, which the paper also addresses, show that a higher cooperation between insiders and outsiders are there or is there when transfers were allowed. Blanco and L could not really confirm these results, so there is no evidence of a positive reciprocal relationship between insiders and outsiders. On average, though, the contributions made by the insiders are not bigger when transfers are involved. Even when we think of a setting with conditional transfers, where the transfers are a greater incentive to make contributions. These results should not provide general concerns on the PES system. The main point or main focus on the study from Blanco and others is the effect on the group behavior or its role. So when PES systems are transferred to a single ecosystem service provider, the circumstances are much simpler. There is not really a final answer to the question why cooperation between insiders and outsiders decreases over time. Possible reasons could be that certain group dynamics lead to that. The payoff differences between insiders and outsiders could be a reason, or just unfulfilled expectations and incentives to free ride. So in conclusion, we could say that allowing for these transfers from outsiders to insiders and making the transfers conditional is not really sufficient to improve provision of the public good. Nahloch and others go in their paper into detail of the potential of external reward systems, the individual and collective rewards, to increase conservation levels. The results are good in that way that they suggest that there is a direct connection between results and the conservation level that can be found. An increase in economic incentives for the conservation and the influence of moral incentives for conservation are related. The individual rewards perform better as they found, so they increase by a critical threshold through a crowding in effect, which stabilizes the collective action by triggering a reciprocity effect. Collective rewards, on the other hand, are less cost effective in that way that they enhance conservation levels, but they can also lead to undermining the pro-social preferences and norms. The cash or in-kind rewards at the group level require individual farmers to self-organize to deal with these PES systems. This fact enhances the bonding and the linking of the social capital. The findings of this paper therefore highlight the importance of a careful assessment of the existing social preferences and norms. If we take these two points together, we can say that paying attention to the group mechanisms and the behavior to the payoff differences could lead to a solution in this matter. Furthermore, both papers show that a higher effectiveness is found in individual rewards, so therefore future studies should maybe rely on that part more. But this needs more research and is not finished already. I hope we could bring this matter near to you and explain it well. Thank you for your attention and see you soon.